As
There
you
we
speak
go.
of it, I think we will.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. And with that, give me just a moment and I'll get back into my screen share here. Yeah, so I think all of the examples that were just shared were really wonderful examples of bioregional maps. Bioregional maps oftentimes reflect different layers and information that we want to convey and communicate, oftentimes that are left off of traditional maps. And I think touching on Megan's map, I think that was a really nice example because just as important oftentimes as what's on the map is what's hidden away. And so it's important for us as communities to come together and really decide for ourselves, what is it that we would like to map? What are the important layers and the things that are being left off? And how do we communicate those things to a broader audience? So I just wanted to share, I think for my map, I just went and pulled this right before the presentation. It's just a really cool app that's called like Global Wind Map, and you can find it on Google. But I really love it because it helps reflect how the physical realities of place influence everything from the air patterns and the weather, how the geology and the hard layers and the subduction zones uplift and downlift, and how air flows and water flows, and then how that might affect our rivers and everything else. And so I just think it's really beautiful. I think it could be almost art. Before I start, I do want to just share a few good resources that I really like. They're really hard to find, and so actually I would also say if I have a lot of these resources in old archival material. If anybody would like to help me document, archive, and get them online so that they're freely accessible and available, that would be really wonderful. We also had the opportunity to talk with Judith Plant and some of the people from New Society Publishers when we were up on Gabriola, and we're actually talking about republishing Home, a bioregional reader. I'd love to actually just like scan and make these available as PDFs and make them available again, because they are really hard to find online. So if you're interested in that, definitely let me know. You can find some of the things that we've documented and scanned on the cascadiaunderground.org. Yeah, and I would love if people want to have other good resources they know, please share it in the chat, specifically around bioregional mapping or things that you think are relevant. And these are some resources that I love, and they're really old. And so what you should do is probably look at them and then go, why am I sharing resources that are decades old? And then we should start talking about how do we get to create new bioregional resources, new books on bioregional mapping that help guide people. Along with that, I'll also just add that if anybody's interested in helping us form a Cascadia Bioregional Atlas or mapping group, I would love to talk with you and connect. We have a Cascadia GIS team. We're working with a lot of people around the idea of a Cascadia Atlas. Aquila Flowers at Western Washington University is also a great resource. She's done the Salish Sea Atlas and others. And I think Zaylin, who's been on, is doing Cascadia.world. And I think there's a lot of other people implementing bioregional maps and atlases into the work they're doing. I would love us to connect and have more conversations about how we can create tools and deepen our knowledge of the places that we live. If you are interested in helping with any of these projects, do reach out to me at Cascadia at Department of Bioregion. If you are not familiar with my work, my name is Brandon Letsinger. I am the founding director of Cascadia Now in 2005. I stepped back from that in about 2017, and more recently, I'm the founding director of the Department of Bioregion. Our work, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. Our work is really around building a world of interconnected bioregions and bioregional movements. More than just here in Cascadia, we want to know where are the other bioregions, who's getting active, and then really help connect people with tools that empower us. And then also, how do we activate that learning across watersheds? How do we create that learning across scale? To start, I just want to give a bioregional address. I think this is a nice little thing that we can all do, which is to start to know where we live. I live here in a house in Wallingford in Seattle. Currently, I'm also living with Joe, Penny, Stephen, and Elite, and Joe's daughter Elise, while they're staying with us. And yeah, it is on the unceded lands of the Duwamish people. That's the First Nation for whom Seattle takes its name, and is still a federally unrecognized tribe. They have a longhouse in South Seattle. It's on the Duwamish River, and that's also a federal Superfund site. It was basically where Boeing built the World War II bombers, and it's highly toxic, and so there's been a lot of work to restore that. A couple places just that I think I'd like to name in terms of that are Shilshole and Ballard and Slolal, which is now where the University of Washington was. Traditionally, it was these were both Duwamish villages, and where the University of Washington is now, it was cleared, and their traditional cemetery was what's now the Arboretum. And so this was, 100, 150 years ago. These villages were still there, even as early as 1900. And so all of this is very recent. And so I think helping people connect into the land and to the histories of their place, because we are so transient, is a really important part of what bioregional mapping can do. Just to kind of highlight this, we have a lot of people who move into Seattle, where I live, and they look around and they go, wow, this is a green utopia. This is a beautiful unaltered landscape, where the city is fit. And it's actually probably one of the most engineered cities, where we've changed the wetlands and literally eroded it, changed the hills, filled it in with artificial till, to this day, and that has a lot of lasting impact. David McCloskey talks about this as being an outpost for global capital, and so and kind of a colony of global capital. So really, one of our big challenges with bioregional mapping and bioregionalism in general, I think, is how do we combat that in a way that can help people connect into place. Beyond just Seattle, I live here in the Cedar River watershed. This is a part of the Salish Sea, which is a part of the Cascadia bioregion. And the Cascadia bioregion stretches from southeast Alaska down to northern California and as far east as Yellowstone. It's our region as defined through our watersheds, and stretches out to the Cascadia subduction zone. This is a part of North America and the world. So I highly encourage everybody, if you don't know your bioregional address, go get familiar with your home, your watershed, your ecoregion, and bioregion. And before I kind of go on too much further, I'd love for us just to kind of look at a map and what's missing. And I'd love for people to share if they would like to. Marga or Ravi
Yeah.
or Jean-Louis, sorry.
No, I'm not sure kind of where you're headed, but I mean, one thing that I think is helpful for watershed, thinking about that, is rivers and river flows and that kind of topography.
Absolutely.
Yeah, topography, mountain ranges, and ecosystems, ecozones,
Sure.
rainfall patterns.
Absolutely. And so within that, if we look at this map of Australia versus a map of the regions, states, provinces, I would love to ask, so are maps neutral? And who made this map? Does it have an agenda?
I mean, I've certainly read a lot and heard a lot about maps having agendas. I think one example is the relative size of North America and Africa.
Well, this one, its focus is demarcating the states of the nation state that was imposed by European colonial forces.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And to be more succinct, the British.
The British, right?
Yeah. So what, and I think Ravi, you already touched on this, but what information is missing from this map? What kind of information would help us have a better understanding of this place?
There's almost no useful information on this map. This is stripped bare.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And so what I would like to point to though is like if we do look at the picture of Australia from space, we can actually see quite a lot of information. There's a lot of information being conveyed to us in that one map. And from it, I think we can determine where does the majority of the population live? Where are the, what are the most populated areas? Where does the rain fall, and how does that impact where people live and how people should live? Yeah, and so just, I think before going on, I do want to just touch base on this idea of bioregionalism. Gary Snyder said it really well. Find your place on the planet, dig in, and take responsibility from there. And he said that in 1970. And so a big part of bioregionalism is really just about working with the realities of place. So how does where we live impact how we should live? How has it impacted how we've lived for thousands of years, hundreds of years? And how can that guide our decisions in the future? Ray Stove, in an article for Yes Magazine, when talking about bioregionalism, had a really nice way of putting it, that there's little natural about the boundaries that divide states and countries. They're often imaginary lines that result from history, conflict, or negotiation. But imagine what the world would look like if borders were set according to ecological and cultural boundaries. And so I think that kind of touches on at least a little bit of the basic goal of what we're doing, just in terms of through our work, and then also through bioregional mapping and the maps we make as communities. To kind of deepen into this a little bit, this means that the work we're doing is cultural work. It's not environmental, it's not economic, but it has to be all of these things working together. It's about using natural place-based realities to break down and move away from arbitrary lines and on maps that are not reflective of the place, communities of people, and can actively be harmful. Culture in this sense is the sum of our personal interactions. I think a big feature when we talk about bioregional mapping is that it's decolonial. So bioregionalism is an alternative to colonial practices. And for us, at least especially with my work in the Department of Bioregion, a big thing that we want to focus on is how do we connect these ideas with every person living here and issues important to them in a way that is positive and provides a pathway to be active. How can people walk out of their front doors and get active with things already happening in their communities? And how do we speed up these processes of unlearning? US and Canadian culture is very transient. It's very unrooted, and people are not familiar with the places that they live. And so how can we create pathways that get people connected in and as fast as possible? For us, I think another really important feature of bioregionalism and bioregional mapping is using these as tools to help us create a stronger place-based bioregional identity. We say a lot that we want people to think of themselves as citizens of their watersheds, not arbitrary nation states. So what does that actually look like, and what does that mean? And I think for us, it's rooted in a love of place and acknowledging that by sharing a land base, we share common experience, values, and language. And also that helps us create shared goals. We have a shared future and want a better future for our kids, regardless of your political affiliation or identity. We can all work and do better together. So where do these identities come from? Bioregionalism has the power to define existing regional identities, relating them to their physical realities of place rather than their relationship with the United States or Canada. For example, rather than Northwest, we use the term Cascadia, but you can really use anything that you want. It could be the Northeast Pacific Rim, it could be anything like that, but starting to shift our framework and language away from that of words that have been defined for us and that are colonial in their base. So we have to create our own language and our own context that is more positive, and that is rooted into the values that we want to be connecting and sharing. It's our goal for every person to know what bioregionalism is, have an intimate connection with their place, and be able to educate others and build local networks, directories, and communities to make the change that they feel they need. And this is really, I think, touching back to what Joe talks about of helping people spread this mycelial web. So how can people develop a deeper connection to the place they call home? And for that, our solution is bioregional mapping. So before I go on, I'd love to just take a minute and look at these maps. So take a minute, look at it, and then, yeah, would anybody like to share with me what exactly we're looking at?
Details a little small. The one on the left is transportation corridors, bus systems. Oh, is that your rail system in Seattle?
Good questions. Does anybody else have any thoughts?
I think the one on the left is a directional map to get from one place to another that assumes you're going to drive. And the other one is a map of places that you're looking, but probably prioritized by the places that paid to be listed on the map.
That sounds like a pretty good guess. Does anybody else have any thoughts? Yeah, well, I might just jump in then. Yeah, I mean, this is just Google Maps, right? Like it's we all use it, I think. And this is a map. I think I was going from my house down to Mountaineer Publishing, which is down in SoDo, South Seattle. And you know, I just thought this was a perfect example of bioregional mapping, and the need for bioregional mapping, because Google Maps are not neutral. And actually they are used as tools. They're used to communicate information to us, and we use these symbols and media and language, and who creates the map and for the purpose is really important. So who creates Google Maps? Google does. Google's a for-profit company. So what is their goal? Well, there's a couple different goals, right? There's my goal, which is it's communicating to me how I can get from my house down to South Seattle as fast as possible with the least, you know, amount of traffic. And then also it's trying to make money, right? It's trying to support itself and make more money and make the most profit for its shareholders. And so the ultimate goal, even if it's just a map, is going to be to encourage that. And so on the left is a list of all the different restaurants and businesses near me, and is a new form of advertising that's, you know, using algorithms to help broadcast these things. I think so much so that now it'll go, you know, go straight 2 blocks, take a right at the Dairy Queen, right? So it's working in ways to advertise and do better. And so it's really important, and the main reason why I talk about this is when we make our own maps, it's about controlling our own narrative and what's important to us, what's the information that we want to convey, and all of the information that's being left off of these maps. And when I got down to Mountaineer Publishing in South Seattle, I just thought it was a beautiful example of everything that's being left off a map. Because in South Seattle, where their campus is located, actually is right across from the Duwamish Longhouse that I talked about earlier. So this is a super fun site. but it's also one of the largest, like, I don't know, waterways, and where the Green River and Duwamish flow into the, the South Puget Sound and in the Salish Sea. There were, so not only is it in the heart of an industrial city, we're right under the West Seattle Bridge, which connects to I-5 and all these freeways. But there's also, if I went 10 feet to the left, I'm at a waterfront, and there are herons and seals, and there are salmon trying to swim, and all the rest of it. And all of these stories are being ignored when we just look at Google Maps as getting us as fast as possible from place A to place B. So I want to just take a moment and contrast that for a second with this. What are we looking at, if you're able to see? And is this a map?
I mean, it looks like Greenland in the middle, but no, it isn't, I don't think.
I'd love to see this blown up about 3 times.
It's a map of the year, of the different
Ooh.
movement of beings through the year.
Yeah, so this is a really cool, I really love this, because I think one of the important things about bioregional mapping is it can also convey time and how things shift and change. The places that we live aren't static, and they change throughout the year. So this is a medicine wheel map created in the 1970s that was included as part of Planet Drum's the Rockies backbone of North America bundle that they sent out. And if you're able to, I'll try to provide a better image of this in the future, but if you're able to see it, it basically talks about the different migratory patterns and the nesting and mating seasons, and the evolution of seeds of a whole ecosystem and environment. So, and how they change in the season. So before moving on, I just wanted to touch on what then is the purpose of bioregional mapping. Bioregional mapping is a community process which shares the things that are special to us, in which we are the expert. Stories, places, communities, time. Maps are political. They have an agenda. They are not passive. These become tools and containers that we use in our movements and communities. And within that, I think that part about that we're the experts is really important. We are all the experts on the places where we live. We're all the experts in what we find special. So the purpose of bioregional mapping is many things. Specifically, we seek to create many different layers of shared stewardship and governance, whether it's salmon or forest cover, maybe it's geology, earthquakes, really based on the physical realities of the places we live. And then within that, we want to use these tools to create a fundamental realignment and rethinking of our governance and the ways that we're living and how we're relating to our landscapes. If we don't create these tools, they don't exist. Governments aren't going to make them for us, and if they did, they would have a different agenda, usually to promote the agenda of a nation state. Companies are not going to create these maps for us. If they did, they would probably have another agenda, probably to make more money. Which is not, no comment on any of that, but just that if we want to make a map of the things we find special and that are important to our communities and the peoples living here, we need to be the ones who help steward that process. Our goal is that we want to turn this map into this map. So from lines on states that second graders learn about in class to this, to the different watersheds, bioregions that people call home. We want to turn this into this. And just to note that this is a map of the Colorado River overlaid with all of the states. So rather than working holistically on a watershed management plan for the Colorado River, in which everybody's an equal stakeholder and all of the communities that are impacted are part of that process, instead we've divided them up into 7 different states who now are competing for scarce resources. So these arbitrary lines on maps actually create competition and scarcity, where instead we could be working together holistically at a landscape and watershed and river drainage basin level to really change these conversations. So what do we need to do that? A common set of definitions, vocabulary, principles, and purpose, a container that we call home. Joe talks a lot about this, but we need learning centers to create resources, map the container, create a shared vision and identity for the place, as well as have an active team to help us monitor the inputs and outputs. We need directories and bioregional movements that help us shift from these nation-state frameworks into bioregional ones. This kind of uses this idea that what we live in is all an imagined community. Within the nation state of the United States or Canada, we will never meet most of the people living here, the 350 to 400 million people. So instead, our collective identity comes through media, symbols, maps, cultural icons. That's things like newspapers. It's things like TV, Twitter, social media, and also things like sports. I can walk into a bar in Texas and have the same conversation about sports as if I was in Seattle. So how do we start to shift that to create our own collective identity, that bioregional identity that's rooted in the place and the values that we find special? And I think that I've already touched on this several times, but a big difference from traditional maps and bioregional maps is that they are meant to be used. They are powerful tools that can be used by a community for self-empowerment and to redevelop or develop a sense of place and a connection to the land. They can be tools of resistance, of education or identity, presented and distributed through schools, community meetings, museums, libraries, and so on. Because a lot of times these resources make more sense than the resources that were provided. Nation-state lines oftentimes aren't reflective of the reality of the place. So by creating our own tools, our own resources, we can shift to it. So here in the Salish Sea, when we have that Salish Sea Atlas that combines the different data sets, different measurement systems between Canada and the United States, that tool is actually more effective than the ones that already exist. So now we can provide that for citizen scientists, academics, governments, and then they can start to use the resources that we create, and we start to shift towards those new frameworks. I would just like to also then touch on, this is a beautiful quote from the opening of Giving the Land a Voice, Mapping Our Home Places in 1995 by Sheila Harrington and Brian E. Penn, who I think are still active on Salt Spring Island. But it was that the Atlas should be used as a jumping off place for decision-making about the future. From the holistic image of place that the maps collectively communicate, what actions could be adopted to achieve sustainable prosperity? What priorities emerge from a survey of damaged lands and unsolved social ills? What underutilized potentials can be put to work to help to achieve sustainability? The Atlas can become a focus for discussion, setting a proactive plan for positive change. So, the secret to all of this is we're making it up as we go, but we get to do this together. And another secret is, so are they. These lines on maps aren't due to any deep, well thought out process. Oftentimes, it's groups of white men who got into a room and decided, oftentimes continents away, how they would divide up the world. So, if you see a straight line, just a hint, it's probably not bioregional. To kind of like help reflect this point, current borders are arbitrary, they do not make sense, they impede action and climate solutions. The current US-Canadian border, which divides Vancouver Island, the Olympic Peninsula, the San Juans, the Gulf Islands, Vancouver, Bellingham, all of these different areas, was decided over a dispute between an American and British farmer on San Juan Island over a pig in the 1850s. A pig ran away, a farmer killed it, and then because of that, it almost started a war between the United States and Canada, and they drew a line. You can see San Juan Island from Vancouver Island. It's crazy. It's just right there. It's so close. So just to say that bioregional mapping is based on physical realities of place. and that nature acts bioregionally on a scale of watersheds, ecoregions, and bioregions. And so because of that, it's important that these bioregions and bioregional maps are the scales that we take action in. This way of thinking has really emerged in the 1970s. The term bioregion was coined in 1972 by a fellow in Newfoundland, I think, named Alan van Nieuwkerk. Peter Berg met him on a road trip right before he went to the UN conference in Sweden, and really was struck, and so really then worked for decades through Planet Drum, helping popularize the idea of bioregions and this way of living and thinking.
Is that Peter Berg on the left?
Yeah, so this is a picture of Judy Goldhaft and Peter Berg in their office in San Francisco, which is run out of their house, or was run out of their house. Judy still lives there, and then with their kids. And so, yeah, and just to say that bioregionalism, bioregional ways of living have been around for almost all of millennia. It just means living within the constraints of your region and the realities of those places. So people have been doing that for millennia, but since the invention of capitalism and all the rest of it, it was really disrupted. And through nation states, now we're just, especially in Western culture, rediscovering ways to shift away from systems which might be not representative, extractive, and back to these bioregional ways of living. So they really helped popularize this idea in the 1970s. And they did that. They're actually celebrating their 50th anniversary this year. They started doing these in 1973. And Planet Drum came out of the diggers in the 60s, Peter Berg, Judy Goldhaft, Raymond Dossmann, and they started it by doing these bioregional bundles. And these bioregional bundles included poetry, artwork, maps, and they would stuff them in these envelopes in a different order every time, and they were meant to be dumped out on a table so that every person would interact and engage with it differently. The medicine wheel, for example, was shared in the backbone, the Rockies. And these ideas really went around the continent. And from there, I think out to Italy and other places. And so it created these little pockets of bioregional thinking, bioregional planning, and where people started to do create their own maps and their own stories of place. At the same time, writers, poets began, Gary Snyder, Ernest Kallenbach, Ecotopia really started to ignite this bioregional imagination. So these ideas then helped spread, and they spread up into Cascadia in the 1980s. David McCloskey was the person, he was a Seattle University professor. He coined the term Cascadia in 1981. And these grew into a series of bioregional congresses that happened they had a conference in 1985 in Bellingham. The first bioregional congress was in 1986 at Evergreen State College. You can see David McCloskey here is unveiling a map a flag that he created that he felt like was representative of the bioregion using the orca fin, because it's so reflective of the shape of the bioregion itself. And these kind of ways of thinking and mapping really started to spread into our region. These early congresses really challenged people to rethink it. You had early conceptions of the Ish River, and the Ish River country actually became the Salish Sea later. So Bert Weber, who helped kind of really get the name Salish Sea adopted in 2010, 2011, was very connected in with a lot of these people. The Ish River country, you can talk to Lance with the Mish Ish. We've had a lot of presentations on that, and I think a lot of people here who know this history probably firsthand. But they came together not only to think about what type of policies they needed, but also what type of maps better represent our place. And as you can see from the 1988 one, maybe it doesn't need to always be a north-south orientation. Maybe north doesn't always need to be on top. How can we change that? How can we engage and interact with our places in a better way? So that really grew into a whole body of people who really wanted to explore mapping. So you had Giving the Land a Voice, Doug Aberle, Mapping Our Home Places. He came out with that in the late 80s, early 90s, and they put together a manual. Throughout the Gulf Islands and San Juan Islands, they worked together to really explore different ways of framing. This also was, you had Judith Plant and Christopher Plant on Gabriola, who initially ran the New Catalyst, and then they actually bought or ended up running New Society Publishers, doing a whole host of bioregional publications and mapping. And then they started to do mapping exercises and workshops. And through that, they developed a host of really beautiful community maps, and they actually did a very large community art project called Islands in the Sailor Sea, a community atlas. They did mapping workshops for more than 5 years. It involved 3,000 people of the 28,000 inhabitants, spanning 17 islands. And yeah, I think started in 1999, and then they published this book in 2005. If you're able to find it, I absolutely recommend getting a copy. It's getting very scarce, so I think scanning it and making it available to people is one of our top priorities. But it is a beautiful example and a how-to of how bioregional maps don't just have to be physical reflections of the place. They can also be cultural reflections of the stories that we find important and that we want to share. And then how that can be combined with art and poetry. Doug Aberle was a professor at, I believe it was the UBC SCART program. And so every year they would start to create these atlases and envisioning Cascadia. So what were the different trees? What are the rivers, the salmon? What are the different indigenous territories and First Nations? And at the same time, this idea of bioregional mapping in the late 80s and 90s was picked up by a lot of traditional First Nations throughout British Columbia. They recognized the need to create their own maps, and that weren't created for them, weren't created by colonial powers or governments, and rather they wanted maps that reflected their own territories as defined by them. So they worked with indigenous elders and as well as younger people to record oral histories of traditional migration, hunting, and other routes. And then they took those oral recordings and worked with people to create the first GIS maps that were owned and created entirely by different nations. And from those maps in 92 and 93, they then used those as the basis for lawsuits against the Supreme Court of Canada, because they were living on truly unceded territory. No treaties had ever been signed. And those maps were able to be used as the basis for creating a lot of the foundations of their own territories and governments. And just to note that those maps were foundational in now current fights going on their own sovereignty against pipelines being put against their territory. So just to talk for a second about what is a bioregion? A bioregion then is the largest scale in which physical connections make sense. It's a life region for each species. So how big does that need to be? For most species, that's really easy to define. For starfish, for deer, for other things. But for humans, it gets very complex because like water, like wind, like rain, we alter our environments. And in fact, we are, the second, third largest changer and mover of our environments. And when we alter our environments, we have to think about different things than just natural boundaries. It's also how do we alter them, and then what impact does that have? So I'd love to just take a minute and ask the question, what is this map? Is this a bioregion?
It looks like Amtrak. You know, I mean, probably an obvious statement. Oh, Cascadia Rail, sorry.
Sure. How about the map on the left?
I thought we were forming bioregions around watersheds and connecting watersheds and people.
But Brandon's saying it's a little more complex than that.
Yeah, I
How
know,
we connect culturally.
but we all need the water.
So
Absolutely.
notice, I just want to say I haven't made any statement. I'm asking a question.
Yeah, I know.
Does anybody else have any thoughts?
Well, it looks like several regions to me because you have mountainous regions, you have water, you know, island regions, you have, you know, drier side. I mean, there's a lot of different regional components. I mean, for
Yeah, I
me,
think that. Oh, sorry.
go for it.
My apologies. No, it look. The left-hand map looks like the road systems. You know,
Sure.
or some of them.
So the map on the left is the Cascadia mega region. And so a mega region is basically defined by the US government where it's incredibly dense, right? So this corridor that's in this picture, stretching from Vancouver down to Portland and actually all the way down to Eugene, contains 80% of the entire population of the Cascadia bioregion, and it's on about 17% of the landmass. And so this corridor is one reason why the Salish Sea and Fraser River needs to expand if we're talking about regional growth, environmental strategies and protections and all the rest of it. But that conversation can't just be in one watershed, because what we do everywhere has an impact, and how we've already started to settle this region in the last 100 years has an impact because we have fundamentally altered our environment. And so it's just to say, it's not to say that we should work in the scales of counties or this or that, but it is to say that when we start talking about real planning, that we need to also be taking into effect our current culture, the economy, the environment, and the impacts that we've had. And with that being said, yeah, so a bioregion is about, well, watersheds are one layer. I think the key is that a bioregion is not just lines on a map, and it's not just going to be one type of line, right? So this is a beautiful map. This is the watersheds. This is what I think of as a quintessentially important map, but it's just one layer. And what we need to be doing too is in a bioregional map, unlike a nation state map, which might just be one or two sets of lines or roads or borders, is that bioregional maps emerge from the landscapes where they're set. So it won't be any one layer that tells us what Cascadia is. And so just to talk about that for a moment, so Peter Berg and Raymond Dossmann helped define a bioregion as a geographic terrain and a terrain of consciousness, to a place and the ideas that have been developed about how to live in that place. So bioregions then are kind of the natural countries of the planet, containing within them many nations, ecosystems, and cultures. So different layers that we might want to look at is where does our food come from? What are the different watersheds and how big do they extend? The Columbia River, largest river in Cascadia, travels 1,200 miles through British Columbia, Idaho, Oregon, Washington, including parts of 6 US states and 1 Canadian province. Its border is traced not by governments or treaties, but by every drop of liquid that finds a common path to the ocean. So if we ever want to have real discussions about sustainability or stewardship, about salmon restoration and agriculture or energy, those conversations will need to involve every different community that's impacted by those decisions in these frameworks. And we might not want to start the conversation on this level, but every different watershed and community needs to be having these conversations and needs to be able to be a part of that conversation. And as we look at different layers, you'll start to see that things kind of keep emerging, and over again, you'll start to see the shape of the Cascadia bioregion emerge. And a lot of this at its most foundational just starts with these hard lines, the geology, the rain, how it affects our soils, what gets more sunlight, what gets less sunlight. And then all of a sudden that affects what ecosystems grow where, and then what type of wildlife live there, and then what kind of settlement and how we've settled in the last several hundred years and how people have been living here for thousands of years. So these physical realities can help guide these frameworks. Again, forests, indigenous territories. I think one of the biggest, obviously, is the Cascadia subduction zone. And just to point out that if you want to talk about hard lines, at that south side is the Mendocino fracture zone. So it's literally where continental plates are colliding and crushing and jamming together. And it's through that jamming that we get the rise of the Cascade Mountains and the Olympic Mountains and the Coast Range. And all the rest of that is this crumbling of the crust and crumpling of it. And when that crumpling happens, that's how we get the features that define our region. And just lastly to say that you'll see this reflected. This is a map of the Cascadia bioregion as done by David McCloskey, and then overlaid with a map of wildfires from 2020 and 2021. And you'll see that nature ignores nation state borders. They are not reflective. And so if we want to be talking about these issues, smoke, forest management, agricultural policies, it's going to take all of us working together. So for us then, our bioregion becomes Cascadia, as defined through the watersheds of the Fraser, Columbia, and Snake Rivers, and the largest sense of scale where these physical connections based on place make sense. We can travel around this region. It is really big. I've definitely learned that in the last month. But again, when we travel, there are such similarities. And even where there aren't specific, say, ecotone similarities, the discussions that we're having around dams, around soil, salmon, they bring all of us together. So no matter where you live, what government, whether you're right or left, if you live here, we share a common experience and a shared future. So these discussions will take all of us, whether it's flooding, earthquake, drought, food sovereignty. And it helps us create a geographic scope of action. So home, watersheds, ecoregions, bioregions, many different layers coming together and evolving. So within that, how is a bioregional map made? Firstly, a container is decided and a goal or outcome is discussed. You brainstorm, you bring in the community, the people that you want to be working with, and you figure out what layers you want to map. And then you start with the hard lines, the geology, the faults, the rain, the watersheds, the topography. You go up to the soft lines, the ecosystems, plants, animals, agriculture, wildlife. How does that change over time? And then you start to talk about the human impacts and geographies. This can talk about the traditional First Nations, languages, economy, trading, certainly history, stories, culture, music, food. What's important to your community? What do you want to see? And within that, then we can be future forward in thinking about what vision and what do we want to be building to? How can we use this as a tool to help us map the inputs and outputs? How can we connect this with our movements and our goals? How do we build directories that map people doing similar work in these areas that can build towards the society that we want to see? And I think within that, I would love to stop sharing and actually open it up for a little bit of discussion. So, yeah, so thank you, everybody.
That was great. Thank you very much.
And I'd love to open it up if there are any questions.
Amazing overview. Thank you so much, Brandon.
Yeah, thank
It
you.
really deepens the understanding of
really-
everything that is involved with bioregioning.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So, Jean-Louis, your hand's up, but I'm not sure if it's meant to be up or if otherwise it's going to be Michelle.
Yeah, no, I had a quick comment. And
Yeah.
first of all, Brenda, I wanted to recognize your work and for how long you've been at it. And I'm sure I have learned so much. And, you know, you strike me as being still pretty young. So you definitely fell in that, in those waters even younger. So it's amazing and just so rich. So thank you for sharing all that. I had a couple of questions, and they're really open questions. You know, one is around the participatory nature of this mapping, as you've illustrated, and making sure that it reflects what people need and want, and how to nudge that forward as opposed to being tools, right, that get developed by someone who has mastery of these tools. And so the activation tour, I'm wondering how you're thinking about it in the context of the activation tour. The second thing is connections between bioregions in a globalized economy. Because let's face it, materials flow in and out, right? And the majority of our food and our water and other flows come from outside or go outside. So how do we reflect that? And then the third one is around, you know, that connection between the jurisdictional and the community or the participatory, and how we can use that. And if you have examples of how you've used that to influence decision making in political context or economic context. But thank you for all this.
Yeah, really great questions. And firstly, yeah, you know, I didn't used to feel so old, and then I think after COVID, all of a sudden now I have gray hair and my hair is falling out and all the rest of it. So I blame COVID, and I think now I'm old. So that's how it works. Yeah, I think so. You bring up a really important point, which is, I think a huge part of bioregional mapping is that we are looking to take the process of mapping and demystify it so that it's not just in the realm of experts and professionals. And in fact, that we all are experts and professionals. And so I think it can be used as community mapping, it can be used as art mapping, tools of resistance, and all the rest of these different things. But it is interesting too that, but the goal of it is to create tools and resources that our movements need and that our places need. And actually, so it is actually a fine balance, because then we also do want to create professional looking resources. And it's amazing that when you create those resources, that people all of a sudden start to use them. And they wouldn't. It's like you have to kind of imagine it before we can get there. And a big part of this is then imagining the resources and tools that we need. And so there's an interplay. There's both, and even now with the Cascadia mapping that we do a lot of community art mapping, and especially with envisioning. But we also work with a very specific Cascadia GIS team to try and then connect this work and make it functional and usable. And again, so yeah, so it is a balance. And in terms of the global connection, I think that that's been the most exciting part of the work that we've been doing. We've been connecting with a lot of people through the design school, but even before then, we get people from all over, and they are so interested in, you know, what bioregion am I in, and how do I get connected, and how do I plug this in? So creating these tools, templates, and making the things that we're doing replicable so that people can help develop their own story of place and figure out their own bioregional frameworks, I think is really important. So through the design school, what's been most exciting is that, you know, we're connecting with and doing these bioregional mapping workshops now with people who live, you know, the Colorado River Basin, the Great Lakes, and then those people are now trying to weave together these movements that connect those things together. And a big shift of like why why we stepped away from what I was doing earlier. And then what we wanted to do with the Department of Bioregion was really start to explore these questions of what are the other bioregions and how do we connect those things together. And it's really exciting to see people now making those connections and all the rest of it, and to actually have those conversations with people who are on the ground, starting to think in that way. So in terms of, and then I guess just one final thing is I think an example where bioregional frameworks have actually made a difference. There are a ton of examples within Cascadia. One of the strongest I think that I would use would be the example of the Salish Sea. The Salish Sea was originally, I think it was Bert Weber in 1988, first started to promote this idea. The Salish Sea was not traditionally the Salish Sea. It is a constructed term that is honoring the Coast Salish people. But it was the Puget Sound, and I think the the Georgia Strait there, and the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and people can correct me on the proper terms. But the beautiful thing is that it was through a process in the 90s and early zeros that brought together a coalition of academics, of policy planners, of First Nations, all working together to rename this area the Salish Sea. And now we have that, and so I think Washington and British Columbia both officially adopted it in 2010, 2011, somewhere in there. And once they did that, now there are maps that talk about this, and now we can actually look at the entire Salish Sea as a watershed and ecosystem, not divided into the Puget Sound that's just south of the border. And it is ridiculous. I will just say, working with our GIS, with the people who do GIS, and Aquila Flowers at Western Washington University is really big at this. Matthew Sparks at UW was really big at this. And this team that we're now working with, I mean, they have to sort through so much data because it's a different data set south of the border, different data sets north of the border. And to put all that together, it's like crazy how hard it is. But once you do it, it's now a tool that can be available for everybody. So Michelle.
Hi, Brendan. I'm talking to you all from New Zealand, so coming from a completely different place and really just starting out on the mapping process. So I'm really interested in the nuts and bolts and how we can get access to all the information that we need to get started. So I just want to ask a question that came up in your presentation when you talked about creating a container or deciding about a container. What do you mean by a container?
I think first it's just so what's the actual physical space that you want to map?
Oh, I see. Yep.
But the container can also be what you want to map. It actually doesn't, I think a bioregional map is necessarily connected into place, but as that medicine wheel shows, that's not connected in with any like physical boundaries, even though it's the Rockies. And so I think the most important thing might be the information or message that you're trying to convey, and then what's the community or process that it's coming from. So for example, it might be a citizen group here in Seattle trying to map green cover, or trying to save, like a big one is trying to save old growth trees in Seattle. I think there's less than 6,000 now, and they've actually created a map. And then once it's mapped, if there's any proposed land use action that might affect one of those trees, they can now go out and create a citizen response network that tries to block the construction or get the permitting, or like block the permits to preserve old growth things, specifically around tree coverage in the green cover. So that might be an example.
So a bioregion could contain many containers.
Yes, and in fact, I think necessarily will. And so a perfect example of this, actually, I think that I really love to use is this idea of, I think probably many of you are familiar with the idea of Salmon Nation. And the Salmon Nation is our bioregion. It's a layer as defined by the historic and current extent of salmon. And by creating that map, and that map is the Cascadia bioregion, and it actually goes up into Alaska. And by using that map, though, what they're saying is that if we want to talk about restoring salmon back to their historic extent and doing that pre-contact baseline, this is the layer and the information and the map and the framework that we need to be using. And there's going to be many different containers within that. Every watershed will be its own container, but we'll need all of those containers together to really accurately and adequately respond to that situation.
Oh, thanks for clearing that up for me. Great.
Yeah, I hope it was helpful. Thank you. Margot.
Yeah, just wanted to echo also the kudos to a great presentation. Learned a lot and will continue to. And then just one question and one just note. On the question, it's really, I think the medicine wheel example that you brought up, really, I found quite interesting to have a temporal kind of element introduced here. And it actually brings up something I've been kind of struggling with, which is thinking about the future context or future proofing in some sense, these maps, as we're thinking about them. And I think particularly about one thing that actually kind of kept me up at night, frankly, was Joe's note about how, the ice caps melting will actually cause this blue ocean event, which would stop the rain here. And it really just caused almost a panic in me and to say, well, if there's no rain, well, what the heck happens to everything around us? And in fact, things that would be completely different would end up being able to make it here and more adaptive. And so how do we know that we're when we're acting with intentions, how do we know that that's actually going to be good for the region? And so, struggling with that, I don't know if you've introduced any element of future contexts or scenarios that would then alter any sort of place-based action.
Yeah, there was a really nice, now I'm going to forget his name. There's a really nice, we worked with a really cool guy who does, I forget his name, but he does these amazing maps of what different cities look like when they're underwater at the full extent of climate change. And he's here in Seattle, and we made a really nice Cascadia example. But I think just to the note of, that scary scenario that keeps you up at night. Yeah, the fear thing and I think that's what's really halting. I think traveling around, one of the most inspiring things to see is the people who are out in the communities making those changes happen. And because it is just so inspiring. And in every place you learn how fast nature can come back. And and there's these little things, and I'm actually, Brian will be very happy because I'll actually finally use his term, which is this idea of not just thinking in terms of watersheds, but water catchments, and trying to slow water. And I think the really powerful thing is that the more that we transition away from the extractive resources, the more that we're restoring the land's ability, nature's ability to store water and create soil and slow the runoff. And Brian's farm was an amazing example of this, of what, I forget, I'll probably be wrong, but it's 3 acres he lives on, but he's created these swells and swales and hugelkulturs, and because of that, he actually doesn't need to irrigate in summertime, and his things, his pond runs dry, but all the plants stay green because it's now working with the earth in a way that's actually slowing the water, that's actually naturally irrigating it. And if we can start to do that on landscapes, we're gonna be facing increasing drought and temperature and whatever regardless, but this really helps us create resilient communities. And the more that we create that resiliency, the more that we're networking with each other, and we're creating the ability to mitigate whatever is going to happen. And if we don't, the effects are going to be far, far worse. And yeah, so it's just all about kind of, I think, mapping these things together. And just, I guess, actually, that takes me back also to the first question too, which is a big part of this activation tour and summit is actually to start helping us create a regenerative movement map. And I think that's a bioregional map, because what we want to connect with and help map are all of the different people in each community doing the work. And when we can actually connect that and put that on a map, people can see each other. and they can connect with each other. And that was something that Claire and I identified when we were in the Salmon Nation Edge Prize, is that brought together 140 people over 8 weeks, all throughout Salmon Nation. And some of these people who were like doing insanely cool projects were like a mile away from each other, and they had never heard of each other. So that first step of like just even opening it up so that we can see each other, see the work, see the amazing, and I think there's a lot to be said too, that the answers for what we need are happening in our communities. You know, it's not like we're doing anything new. We're not coming in and saying we have a new idea, but we are saying, hey, we have containers that we'd like to connect with, and we'd like to open it up so that we can see that work, and then I think make it more accessible. What we need to do is increase the accessibility for people to connect with these projects, to learn from them rapidly, so that they can replicate them in their own communities and places to give us the best chances for that resilience. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, that definitely does. I love it. And I also wanted to point out that one resource I found really quite interesting, and also really a great meditative tool also, is this author named Tristan Gooley, who is English author, who writes these books called Natural Navigator and also How to Read Water. And, you know, talks a lot about how to listen to nature to find our way. And it's the antithesis of the Google map, right? Which is reclaiming our ability to actually navigate with nature. Which I think as a mapping tool is incredibly powerful, to go outside and actually listen to nature and observe it to its fullest. So just a resource that I found personally very helpful.
Beautiful. And yeah, with that, I'd love to, you know, keep it open for questions. We are just nearing 4:30. So at this point too, I'd actually kind of just love to open it more up. And our goal is that we would like to have a Cascadia Unconference, or Regenerate Cascadia Unconference, that's next weekend. That could be a 1 day or a 2 day, but actually we'd just like to really now, I think, open it up to what people would like to see come out of it. And maybe also thoughts and reflections of this process, whether it's the summit or the activation tour. And so I would actually like to just step back a little bit myself, and then open it up if anybody here would like to say some comments or thoughts.
I'll jump in with, I think the networking, to find the other people, the connections, the shared resources. Let's hit the ground running after this. This is exciting. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, and the shared resources, I actually think we've probably missed an opportunity like over this weekend. But so I'd actually like to, we'll try to think about some way to open up a map, because I think that's another place that we could really, I think we have such a knowledgeable, diverse group here that looking at books, resources, classes. So maybe we'll try to create that as a thing that people can submit as well, of just creating a knowledge archive of some really amazing things to share. Michelle or Mike, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think Michelle's maybe from before, so I hope I'm not being rude here. Yeah, I'm not saying anything new, Brandon, and probably to not a lot of you either, but I do have this incredible feeling that seeds are an incredibly what's the word I'm looking for? A wonderful way of bringing people together, because you know we've talked about food supply challenges. Anyway, I won't go on for long, but you know, certainly I'm putting together a document and other things relating to the experiences we've had in creating a large seed collection over 5 years. So I'll be sharing that. Thank you.
Yeah, and actually, I think Mike, you're a perfect example of what we hope to have come out of next week. So I'll give a little bit more context in that we've had this amazing activation tour. Regenerate Cascadia itself is a very new idea that kind of emerged out of April and May and June. And so we have a lot of really important next steps. I think the big ones are going to be documentation. So the first, as soon as this ends, we'll shift into documenting both the tour and summit, and then really like helping to share the wisdom, knowledge, experiences a brief picture of some of the areas that we've touched, or that have that were a part of it. And then also our big goal is going to be to activate these different watershed groups. So, and identify people who would like to kind of take the lead in each area, as defined by the people who really stepped up and leaned in. And so we have these emails, we have so much processing to do to like kind of go through the emails, get them set up, get them out to the different leaders so that they can hopefully have their own meetings. And we still would like to have a report back with all the different watershed groups. And then for the next weekend, though, what we'd really love to come out is basically to have a small little open space conference led by all of the people here in this room who've been on the tour, who have participated, hosted, about what they would like to see, what they think is important. And the idea, I think, is that it's helping people together to connect in watersheds, and then it's helping people to connect by interest or by, and specifically by work group. And I think more than just a discussion or a let's learn about things, we want to know what the next steps are. So everything now is geared towards how do we keep the momentum and energy and all of the amazing knowledge in people? How do we move forward in a way that can help empower all of our work, and also to get Regenerate Cascadia up? And so Mike Brunt has actually all along, he's been awesome about, he's like, seeds, the answer is seeds. I want to do seeds. And so next weekend, he'll be sharing that. But his big goal is to actually have a work group that could help create a Cascadia Seed Guild. Yeah. And Mike is in Eugene, and we've got Brian, who's in Bellingham, who does the Salish Seed Guild. And I think we have a lot of other permaculture seed collectors. And so how do we get all these people together to get a Cascadia Seed Guild that just gets all our seed people connected? And then honestly, like, what if it was funded? What are the roles that you would need to empower that work? What how do we weave those people together? And that's really across landscapes. So we're doing the work in our local watershed. We're trying to get a core team that can help organize in each watershed, but we're also connecting almost like these guilds together of different interests. I think Darren has really wanted to do like a like the Web3. How do we like bring in these other things? Yeah. Jeff has talked about how to crunch data. Megan's talking about how do we get a group up in Vancouver. And so I think also other things that we really need to work on and need help on, honestly, is things like the website. So what do we want out of a central website for Regenerate Cascadia? And then how do we start to build tools and templates for to make this process scalable? So how do we have a Regenerate Whidbey, a Regenerate Bellingham, a Regenerate Eugene, a Regenerate, and so we've got kind of like this like WordPress multi-site setup. We've started to do, when I talk about a regenerative movement map, we're using something called Kumu right now. But we also have like all these insanely smart people who do like Wikipedia, the Federated Wiki projects, High-Low. I think Benjamin Life was talking about the Open Civics project. And so we just need a lot of teams and people to help us start to implement that. Sorry, a bit of a ramble there.
Very important.
Brandon, given that that's what the needs are, do you have a vision of how this week can move us in that direction?
I think the vision is, so we really wanted to give space for watershed groups to have like an organizing space during the week. I'd actually love to hear back from, we actually have several organizers. I feel like the timing has been too rushed for us to be able to do an effective job, like getting the emails from each area. So I'm kind of thinking now that rather than doing watershed report backs or organizing in the evening, we could maybe do like one evening where we all gather on like a Thursday or something. But that really then the next step is sometime in December, we work with the different teams, get them the emails, and then they can self-organize an in-person meeting. And then we can come together and really move forward on that together. For the actual unconference, I think the idea is that we'll open up a shared agenda document on the website. We'll basically, the website will be totally shifted away from the summit now to the unconference next weekend. And we'll create a shared agenda document where anybody who would like to host a work group, like what Mike is talking about, So a Cascadia Seed Guild might be a work group, and it doesn't have to be work group. That's not the right word, but an open space group. But like, you know, things like bioregional education. Maybe a group wants to help work on the website. Maybe a group wants to talk about grant writing and financing and fundraising. Maybe a group wants to talk about things that are important to them. And so keeping it really open. And then at 9, so my idea is the first session of next weekend would be gathering together as a group to share the different ideas for what the sessions would be. And then we would collectively build the agenda, and we'd have different sessions throughout the day. And then at the end, there would be a closing, and but really focused on the next steps that people would like to see. Ben, please go ahead.
I think it's funny, one of the things with the mapping, the bioregional mapping part that I thought we might talk about was kind of mapping the connections between all of these different aspects. And I see the value in breaking, you know, into the interest areas, into the work groups, or however we want to theme it. But I feel like there's still some work that needs to happen at a kind of higher level around coordination and thinking through, I guess, you know, thinking through how does the integration work moving forward? So I think part of that, like, in my mind, I'm seeing like a map, you know, like there are people that want to do work on water, and there are people that want to do work on food, and there are people that want to do, and some of those are more closely related than others, and some have their, you know, tentacles everywhere. Like, you know, the finance thing is, you know, reaches into everything. So I wonder if there could be some part where we could have that conversation where we're actually starting to think through. And it's like you were saying, with, you know, with the map, there are these different layers. So one layer is the geography, who's close to you, but then there's also the kinds of projects, the sort of the focus areas where, you know, I might be more interested in maintaining a closer connection with somebody who's geographically further. Actually, that's the thing. Anyhow, I'm starting to ramble, but it's that layering. You know, it's how do we have that conversation, and how do we capture that? So I'm just going to put that out there.
I think that's awesome. That would be a great, and that's almost, so I kind of term that, you know, between the interconnective tissue, but there's this like organizer's DNA. And I think that there is actually, like, so the other two big components, which I probably failed to name, are the big goal with this is to just make something that's functional, usable, that people are excited about, and that can support their work by kind of connecting and empowering all of our work. And I think really helping people to come together on that landscape scale and be supported in the work that we need to see happen as defined by themselves. And so that also then brings in a really beautiful component, which is how do we make decisions together? How are we allocating funding in a way that's transparent and accountable, as defined by those communities? And what's cool is that the minute that we do that, and I don't care if it's $100, $500, $1,000, you know, or $1 million, it's governance. And I think that we practice small, but I think the biggest thing that was most that I thought was really important about how Joe talks and thinks, that I really loved, is he's not afraid to like throw out these like huge numbers and to think on a scale that I think a lot of us are afraid to think on. He literally, he's just like, you know, he'll just throw out, you know, say you got $100 million and you needed to get that money to every community in your watershed, you know, to help fund regenerative projects within the year. Could we do that? Could we accountably track it and trace it? And the answer, well, and it's certainly, I think there are some people out there who could say yes, but certainly here in Seattle, no, you know, we don't even have a decision-making framework. So how could we like equitably allocate that? How could we bring people together to map and do that? And so that scale, it also then becomes that this becomes a practice in growing our capacity. And how do we scale that up? And how do we get, and then I think a big part of that then is this idea of creating a bridge, and a bridge between, say, like traditional capital and then the people who are on the ground doing it, because they're so busy doing it, you know, we can't all afford grant writers or this or that. So how can we scale our work up so that we can work together collaboratively on that landscape level? And I think that's really, yeah, exciting. So yeah, Jean-Louis.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'll mention, someone mentioned earlier the 1,000 Landscapes for 1 billion people initiative, and Brandon, I think I would really encourage you and maybe Claire, maybe a few others to join. I can point you to some ways to join. And there are two things that I think are especially relevant. One is the notion of landscape coordination, and how to build that coordination capacity. And I think to Ben's question, that is so critical. And there are some tools being developed for that, and methodologies and models, blueprints. Is around finance, and actually, you know, with some partners, we happen to be especially active in the finance work stream, and then looking at all the types of capital that can help finance bioregional projects, from philanthropy to community capital to investor capital to
I think we're losing you a little bit.
a different level scale, right, from the very local. Yeah, sorry, I mean, I'm in the car in a dead zone.
No worries.
So anyway, I just wanted to say that, and Brandon, I'm happy to pick that up separately.
Yeah, please do. And I think what's nice is I'm looking forward to, after this month and summit, of having a little bit more time and capacity myself. Yeah, Ben.
Yeah, I wanted to build on this idea of decision making and accountability and growth and growing the capacity. Time to put the chickens to bed. Growing capacity is it's high on my list too. And how do we make, like you're saying, how do we have the easy way for people to bring people in? And one of the things that I have used in a lot of different groups is, if we can figure out what some short-term projects are, small things that we can start right now, maybe not the whole thing, maybe a pilot, maybe just trying something light and easy just to see how it goes, but give ourselves like a deadline. So, you know, we're meeting now in November. Could we set another time, say in the late spring? And so one of the things that we could determine by the end of the unconference, by the end of next week, is at least just a high level, here's what we think we're going to try, here's what we think we'll actually get from it, kind of really building in that experimental outcome-based thinking. And then we agree to come back together in, May or, April. And then to accelerate that learning. So some things are going to work. Great, share that out. Some things aren't going to work, even better. We don't have to do that again, and how do we, and anyhow, it also then creates that April conference or unconference becomes a new doorway that more people can get involved. They can sign up for the next projects. So anyhow, it's something like that would be, I think, a way of breaking it down, making it more manageable and less, we don't have to save the world by April. We just have to make the first step.
And so I love it too. I think that Claire talks about this a lot, but that oftentimes things can get, especially when you go up to the high levels, it can get abstract really quickly. So keeping what we're doing rooted in with the work that we're doing, and the actual on the ground communities and people doing the work is really important. I'd also just add that we put this activation tour and summit together in about 2 months, with a small team of 2, 4, and then like a huge team of people on the ground in each area actually doing this. So 50, 100, 150 people probably in the end, working to help host us in 14 different communities. And we are so excited that this was all just a test, and to see what worked, what didn't work, what were good communication strategies, how do we host an online summit, never done this before. So really amazing to see how many people came out and helped make this happen. And so what I'm also excited by then is like, what happens when we get 6 months of planning, a year of planning? And also, I think what's also clear is that Cascadia is a really big area. There are these pockets, the Willamette Valley, the Salish Sea, and then we got to, you know, and we haven't even started talking about the interior. We have people, you know, Jan and others who are in the headwaters of the Columbia, who are in the interior. They want to get active. They want to start a group. They want to have these same conversations. How do we help catalyze that? And then more importantly, how can we train lots of people and get lots of ambassadors in every different watershed so that they're self-organizing for themselves? And I think, how are they, you know, we might need to have lots of different activation tours all happening at the same time, or maybe we have many different ones spread throughout the year. Maybe we have one summit, maybe we have 4 summits, maybe we have one central one and lots of decentralized ones. So those are all just kind of thoughts, and I think really important though to think about. And with that, I'd love to turn it over to you, Chuck.
Actually, can I just step in there just for a sec? And
Please.
apologies for coming in a bit late. I had to get some errands done. I was trying to squeeze it in. I just really wanted to catch that before we moved on. Was, you know, there are incredible groups that we've come across that are doing this work and helping to organize. I mean, Benjamin Life and the work they're doing. There's a whole bunch of other ones. One of the things, though, that keeps propelling me forward and why I felt like this was such an important thing to do is that often when things start to scale, to get to a larger scale, there's a professionalization and there's a slickness that sometimes comes in, and that's not a bad thing, except that so often I see that it actually loses connection with the relationships on the ground. And so what Brandon was just speaking to was that willingness to fail and to keep it smaller and to keep iterating is just so critical. And it's and so I'm very excited about all of the people that have been doing this work, developing it. And at the same time, I see our role as continually helping to keep it based in the ground and in relationships. So I just wanted to put that in there.
Claire has done a really good job of, a lot of, especially as this game gains steam, gets bigger, it starts to attract a lot of people. Like what I've thought was amazing about the summit is like, it really feels like we have, what we're building is a shared vision, a goal, a context, a language that we are sharing amongst each other. And that is actually kind of a culture. And I feel it so strongly from everybody that we got to connect with on the activation tour. And it's really interesting when things, are brought in well, anyways, but so just to say that I think holding that, the right relationship and holding the vision, and making sure that it doesn't get co-opted or distorted, but also giving us the ability to work within all these channels is really important. So, Chuck, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. This all connects together. A few minutes ago, you were talking about how do we coordinate at a larger scale, and here we are talking about, well, how can we coordinate at a larger scale while maintaining the focus on the small scale? And the group that I've been working in over in Seeds has been working with this conundrum. And one insight is that probably the most powerful coordinating tool in our game A economy and society that we live in is money, right? Money is how we coordinate the activities of different people making different things, offering different services, etc. And when we have a universal, global, or national scale currency, why that coordination is sort of floated up to that high level, and everyone's competing against everyone else in that arena. And one of the tools that we think is important is local alternative currencies that focus the coordination, the economic coordination, much lower down in the bioregional and village scale. And so we've been building tools for that. And the other type of you also brought up the question of, well, let me do a segue that I thought of but didn't execute. So when we talk about resources among our bioregional communities, why the ability to coordinate within a community and then also coordinate between and among bioregional communities without needing the intermediation of the national currency is something that's a vision that we're working on. Because when you're using the national currency, you see this, I mean, this is what we sort of assume when we look at our funding process, right? That there's going to be some big grants that come in at some high level, and then we have to flow it down through some sort of hierarchy, and the coordination is done in sort of a top-down manner that just doesn't feel right. And the more economic generation we can bring up from the bottom, obviously we can't start with 100% at the bottom, right? But what we're doing is we're learning how to work with our own capacity and realizing what the resources in our communities are that aren't accessible through the conventional financial system, and building a resilience that can expand and expand over a period of time. But when we are looking at centralized flows of the distribution of grant money and things like that, as you said, it's really important to have some kind of transparent governance. And even without the centralized currency flows, right, it's a good thing to have transparent governance. And in our communities, our project, why we've been focusing on these Web3 DAO tools. And I think there's no question that they're very powerful, transparent decision-making tools. They can solve a lot of problems. I think the question right now is whether they're accessible to the people who we need to engage right now. There's still a tendency to which you have to have digitally savvy, geeky people doing the voting, right? And so that's not full engagement governance yet. But I think that's a tool which is that's a family of tools that are rapidly getting better. And they're so explicitly transparent that it means it's easy for anyone in the entire globe to go into your organization and see what your decision-making history is and your allocation decisions and so on. So it makes it possible to learn from each other without going through a learning organization. It basically makes everything public.
Yeah, Chuck. Oh, David Ketter, are you going or needing? Yeah.
No, I think I was going to be doing what you were just going to do.
Okay. Yeah, I
these
just
are
want
incredible amount of wonderful ideas, but there's so many of them flowing. I'm not capturing them all in my mind. So I guess I'm confused. And Brandon and Claire, if you could clarify, is this a time for us to be just quickly brainstorming what we're going to do this week? Or are we actually going into depth on ideas?
Yeah, very good point, David. Brandon, you might want to step in here.
Well, I would just step in to say we have 7 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have Lauren Meanies and Kiala Young, and I think David Wetzel. Sorry if I got anybody's name wrong, but with Regeneration Pollination, and then Kiala does a lot of amazing work with Autlan Eco Village and a ton of. I'll let them do their own introductions, but they're going to be doing an offers and a gifts and asks. No, a gifts and offers. No, gifts and asks exchange. Thank you. At 5 o'clock. And so what I would just like to say is I think this is really nice. It's kind of a little bit of a wrap up, but I think what's really nice is we are starting to set some context for ideas. And these are exactly, I think, the reason why we need to have more depth next weekend. It'll be either 1 day or 2 days. I think what we'll do is we'll probably actually, I'll just create a form. People can vote. It'll be a thing. I'm going to email it out to people. And then really, what I'd like to do is I would like to start stepping back a little bit. And I would really love to start creating space where we get to come together to do exactly what just Chuck was talking about. That right there is a work group where they can do a deep dive in more sessions, and then also talk about not just over this weekend, but then how do we stay in touch, and then how do we actually give that teeth? Because I think he was touching on something there, which is how do we give ourselves teeth? And that was a big thread from the early bioregional movement over and over again, is they didn't find a way to support themselves. They focused on all this stuff. They had these congresses and they did it all volunteer based, and then they all went and got jobs. And in interviews, we've had a lot of reflecting on like what they really wish they had done has been focused more on supporting themselves and supporting their work to actually, so that they could do it and actually support it so that they could do it over generations. And so, yeah, so I think that'll be yeah.
Maybe before you, if you can go into David's question, he just put into the chat in just a second, but I did want to say, there are lots of people who have been doing deep dives into this work that have a lot to contribute. And it will take a lot to try and get hold of all of them to come into the conversation. And sometimes it's so frustrating when it's like, oh my gosh, they're reinventing the wheel. We've been working on this for ages. So there's a need to honor the work that's already gone on. I think that the conversations will be really productive, just coming up with a game plan as to how to have the conversation, especially around like regenerative finance. There are really good people that need to be here. Maybe they won't all come together in one room, but just starting to have the conversation about what has come out of this learning period and coming together that needs to now start going forward, and who will help to steward those conversations. So I just wanted to put that in. It's just, I think it's really, yeah, there's a lot of really wonderful, thoughtful people here, but we also need to draw on the knowledge that's out there. So Brandon, over to you for the details about how to do this.
Yeah, it's a great question, David. So I would like to, let's touch base via Telegram after this, or a phone call or text or email. I think the big thing is that we created space for the watershed report backs, and I don't think we actually had time. Like, it would be really nice to have time to actually work with the organizers, get them the emails, and invite in each place. I'd like to do that with Seattle and other things. The other thing is that not a lot of people had filled out the watershed schedule. So I think Megan and Jan from the Columbia Headwaters, and Megan were the only two people who had submitted times, and they actually didn't even host an activation tour. And then it was Claire and myself. So so it's just a thought. So we were thinking about, rather than trying to do different sessions on different days, maybe of just having a watershed organizers session, maybe like Thursday or Wednesday, but then really taking the time to follow up. But I would love input on that. And then if people would like to submit a session for the open space, I will be transforming the website once again after the summit's over. We'll list all of the recordings for the summit, will be listed there. Please share them out, watch them, watch the ones you weren't able to do. And then I will also have links on the top menu for how people can just share for the open space. And it's just going to be a Google Doc, and we can share collaboratively. And what I'll set it up is that anybody will be able to sign up to host a session, as well as note take a session. And then the other part would be that people can put in interest if they're interested in joining a group. So Mike can actually go into this the shared agenda, say, I want to host a session on creating a Cascadia Seed Guild. And or I could go in and say, I need help with the website or archiving. And other people could say, oh, I want to join that as a session. And then next week, as in our first session, we'll actually create the agenda with what's been created there. So Catherine.
Brandon, just apropos of what you just said, I want to make sure I understand it. So sometime this week, we will be getting access to names and emails in our watersheds that we can begin to contact about issues and future discussions, and encourage them to attend next weekend. Am I understanding that right?
Yes, and if anybody would like to help, that sounds so great. Pop into our Telegram group or email me, and then let's set up a session to talk and start planning. I think that's really the next step. Is we need to just talk together. I'd like to make it in so it's like this weekend was about sharing knowledge and lessons that are working in our own watersheds and sharing the learning across watersheds. Next weekend, we actually come together and start planning. And we will I think we'll be scrambling to create our next steps after this ends tonight. And then we'll send that out. And so we can work together to figure out what that looks like. But yes, hopefully.
Can I just add one thing there, is that many of the people who stepped up to coordinate in the different communities did so having huge burden of their own, but they did it because they believed it needed to happen. It's really important that for each community that somebody actually steps up, and that there is more of a team. So this will really help it to go forward. So there's one contact person to kind of help fan things out. So that's something that's going to be up to every community.
Yeah, we want to really create space so that we can create these teams in each watershed. And give them space so that they actually have all the information so they can organize and step into it. So thank you. And with that, I think it is 5 o'clock. If you have any other questions, because I think there's probably lots, if you want to be involved, we welcome it. Please. Thank you. Step in. Join us on the Telegram, t.me/RegenCascadia. You can find it on the website, or you can email me, cascadia@departmentofbioregion.org, and you can join the frenetic scramble that is our organizing. And with that, though, I would love to turn it over to Lauren and Kiala, who are hosting the gifts and asks exchange. So thank you all. And thank you all so much. It's been really wonderful and beautiful. So just a round of applause and thank you. So.
Thanks so much, Brandon. Just make me and Kayala and Dave Witzel co-hosts. I'm going to need to share screen. So, all right, we're going to jump right in because today, this session, hour and a half, jam-packed. So thanks everybody for being here and welcome. My name is Lauren Minnis. I'm the Director of Regeneration Pollination. I live in Boise, Idaho, and I'm also here with one of our partners and co-founders of Regeneration Pollination, Dave Witzel, with the Global Regeneration Collab, who's in Arlington, Virginia. Say hi, Dave.
Hi, Dave.
Thanks, Dave. And Kayala Young from the Columbia River Gorge, Cascadia.